You just finished changing your oil. Did it in your own driveway. Bought the jug, drained the old, poured the new, swapped the filter, tightened the plug. Key on, engine fires up clean. Dash is dark, no warning lights. Looks like a job well done. And 47,000 miles later, that same engine gets towed into your shop. Knuck all through the top end. Crank journals scored. Bearings pounded into foil. Full rebuild territory. Repair bill starts at around $2,200 for the low-end job on a 4-cylinder Camry, and it climbs from there. If we're talking a V6 or a turbo, easily double. And here's what gets me. The oil change itself was done right. Good oil in the jug. OE filter. You crawled under the car instead of paying someone. The problem wasn't what you did. The problem was what you didn't do. An oil change is actually a small set of procedures where the pour itself, the part everybody focuses on, is the safest, simplest part of the whole job. Around that pour, there are 9 specific mistakes, and each one looks like a nothing detail. That's exactly why they get skipped, including by guys who've been changing their own oil for 20 years. Over the last 18 months, I've personally seen 4 engines come into a shop I trust after clean driveway oil changes by the owner. 3 of the 4 went to the low end of a full rebuild. 1 was a total loss because the crank welded itself into the mains and no machine shop wanted to touch it. Total damage across those 4 owners, pushing $40,000. And these weren't exotics. A Corolla, an older Focus, a Kia Soul, and 1 Camry. I'm going to walk through all 9, for each, what breaks, why it's expensive, and how to stop it from happening. At the end, there's a bonus that saves the engine in the first 3 minutes after startup, and I almost never hear anyone talk about it. We're counting down from 9 to 1, so we start with the least catastrophic and end with the mistake that ate the Camry. Mistake number 9, wrong oil spec and outright counterfeits. The label says full synthetic, big S on the front, familiar logo, nice price. You grab it. You don't cross-check the spec against the owner's manual. That's the first trap. It's not really about the brand. It's about the fact that your engine was designed for a specific set of approvals: APISP, ACEAC3, Dexos 1 Gen 3, MB229.51, VW 504.00, whatever the manual actually calls out. Those letters and numbers aren't marketing fluff. They're limits on total base number, shear stability, phosphorus content for catalyst protection, and cold pumpability. Put in an oil without the right approval, and it will work, right up until it doesn't. Real-world examples. BMW N20 and N63. Engines on. Non-LLO4 oil will coke up the Vanos system by the 40 to 50,000 mile mark after the wrong fill. Hyundai and Kia Theta 2. Engines running synthetic without proper LSPI protection. That's the family that ended up in the 2020 recall program. Will drop rod bearings before the 100,000 mark. Modern turbo direct injection engines on the wrong oil accumulate intake valve deposits at multiples of the normal rate. Separate issue, outright fakes. They exist, and they're not just at some no-name lot on the side of the road. AAA has flagged inspections where counterfeit oil turned up on shelves at fairly ordinary chains. The label looks perfect: hologram, tamper seal, embossed cap. What's inside is a mineral base with a bootleg additive package mixed in a shed. TBN, total base number, on a fake can be 2 to 3 times below spec straight out of the jug, which means your engine is running on acid from the first mile. How to protect yourself. First, buy from a source that has a reason to protect its supply chain, a major parts retailer or a dealership counter, not a stall at a flea market. Second, match the approval on the label to the manual, word for word, not 5W30, the specific approval. Third, look at the bottom of the jug. Real bottles have date codes and lot numbers molded into the plastic, not stickers glued on top. Fourth, if the price is 40% below normal, that's a flag, not a deal. Mistake number 8, ignoring the dash maintenance light. The panel lights up with the little yellow book and wrench icon. You know what it means. It means service due. You push the button, the light clears, and you forget about it until the next time. The problem is, your engine may not survive that next time. The maintenance indicator on modern cars isn't a simple mileage timer. On some BMW, Mercedes, Volvo, and some Ford and Chevy models, it's an algorithm that watches actual load. It counts cold starts, average temperature, RPM under load, time under boost, average speed. A car that spent the year stuck in Chicago traffic isn't the same car that ran I-80 across Nebraska. The second one might genuinely be fine at 10,000 miles between changes. The first one is eating its oil in 5. What's actually happening to oil that's overstayed its welcome? Full synthetic, TBN drops from 8 to 10 at the fresh fill, down to 3 or 4 at end of interval. The dispersant additive pack gets used up, and soot from blow-by starts falling out of suspension. The friction modifier, the zinc phosphorus package, ZDDP, degrades. That's the pair that keeps cam lobes and lifters from grinding on each other. Then the cascade starts. Soot clogs the pickup screen. Oil pressure drops in the top end. Lifters pump on a starvation feed. Cam lobes score. A guy I know who runs a shop outside Columbus, Ohio, has a wall in his back bay with photos of engine after 10,000 miles past change interval. It's a wall of horror. Intake choked in deposits, pistons lacquered, cams chewed up. And all these cars drove in under their own power. The owners all said the same thing. Just a little longer, I'll get to it. What a little longer cost them ran from a couple thousand for a head job to a full rebuild north of 5. Simple rule. Light on the dash means the service gets scheduled, not cleared and dealt with later, not after the road trip. Scheduled for the next free week, and it doesn't get moved. Mistake number 7. Over-tightening the drain plug. The drain plug is the most underrated part of an oil change. You hand tighten it, then you snug it with the wrench just in case. That's the line between a healthy oil pan and a pan that needs replacing. On the old cast iron pans that were bolted to classic Toyota and Chevy engines up through the 90s, the M14 threads in cast steel could take almost any torque. Overshoot, no problem. Modern cars are different. Aluminum pans are the standard on 80 to 90% of new light vehicles. Kia Rio, Hyundai Elantra, VW Jetta, most BMW and Mercedes. Toyota went aluminum on the Camry pan back on the XV50. Threads an aluminum strip at torque values that steel would laugh at. Factory torque spec for the drain plug on most modern engines is 25 to 30 foot-pounds. That's it. By feel, a firm hand with a normal 6-inch wrench, tighten until you feel real resistance and add a short additional pull. If you grab an 18-inch breaker bar and lean on it with your body weight, you're putting 60 to 70 foot-pounds on there, and aluminum threads will not survive that. What you get? Option 1. The threads pull out of the pan. Plug spins. Oil starts leaking. Replated the pan. On a Kia Rio 2nd Gen, around $350 for the OE pan plus labor. On a Toyota Camry XV50, starting at around $500. On a BMW F30 with the integrated pickup tube design, starts at $750. Option 2. A crack in the pan body next to the plug. Now you're doing a full pan replacement because welding cast aluminum on the car is a one-time deal with unpredictable results. The right way. Replace the crush washer every time. Old washers are already deformed and won't seal at a reasonable torque. Tighten with a normal wrench until you feel firm resistance. Add a short turn, call it a quarter turn, and stop. If you're not sure, a decent 3/8 drive click torque wrench in the 5 to 80 foot-pound range costs about $40 at Harbor Freight and pays for itself the first time you don't strip a pan. Mistake number 6. Draining on a cold engine. Saturday morning. Car has been sitting overnight. You decide to do the change right now. No warm-up. Wrench, drain, refill, done. Logic. Cold engine, everything's settled, the crud is on the bottom. I'll drain the crud out with it. Wrong logic. That's exactly the oil you don't want to drain. Freshly run oil, say 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. Warmer is better. Around 120 to 140 Fahrenheit is a thinner fluid where sludge, soot, oxidation byproducts, and fine metal particles are all held in suspension. Drain warm, they leave with the oil. Drain cold, half of it stays behind, stuck to the pan walls, clinging to the pickup screen, sitting on the magnetic plug. Within a minute of pouring in fresh oil, that residue starts mixing into the new fill, and you've just paid full price for premium oil that's contaminated on day one. Second issue with cold drains. Thick oil moves slowly out of the small oil galleries in the head. A thin film of old oil stays up top and mixes with new on the first startup. Ideal sequence. Start the engine. Let it run at idle for 5 to 7 minutes until the temperature gauge just starts to move off cold. The engine is warm but not hot, safe to work under, minimal burn risk. Shut it down. Wait a minute or two for oil to drain back down from the top end into the pan. Open the drain. Let it flow. You'll notice how much darker warm drain oil looks compared to cold drain oil. That's not the engine getting dirtier faster. That's the crud that was staying inside on your last cold drain. Mistake number 5. Installing a dry oil filter. You pull the new filter out of the box, spin it on dry. Start the engine. Oil light drops within a second or two. From your seat, it looks fine. From inside the engine, it isn't. For that second or two while the pump was filling the empty filter, the crank bearings, cams, lifters, and turbo bearings were all running on dry metal. Not on minimal oil, actually dry, because normal overnight oil drain down already puts them close to that. And a bone-dry filter adds 200 to 300 milliliters of additional empty volume to the system. 1 or 2 seconds of dry metal contact on a new engine with healthy bearings, negligible. 1 or 2 seconds on an engine with 150,000 miles, where the bearings are already work-hardened and the turbo shaft is running looser than it did new. That's a real dose of wear per event. Multiply by 12 oil changes, and you're adding 20 to 30 seconds of cumulative dry running on your most loaded parts over the life of the car. Not nothing. The right way. Filters that mount vertically. Most transverse engine bays. Pre-fill by pouring fresh oil directly into the filter body until it's about 3/4 full. Let it sit 30 seconds to soak the media. Spin it on. Filters that mount horizontally or at an angle. You can't pour full without spilling. Fill what you can and orient the filter during install so the oil stays inside. Usually that means turning it a good ways off vertical, spinning on quickly, then rotating up to the mounting position. Cartridge filters. When you replace just the paper element inside a housing, it's easier. Pour oil into the housing, drop the element in, close the cap. Harder to skip, but people still do. An older friend of mine changed the oil on his 2010 Volkswagen Passat 2.0 TTSI a few years back in a driveway outside Cleveland. The car had about 180,000 on the clock, well kept. He put the new filter on dry, no pre-fill, because he was in a hurry to leave. Started up, oil light blinked once, went out. He drove off. About 7,000 miles later, he had a light valve train tick that wouldn't go away. Lifter noise. Diagnosis at the shop, micro-scoring on cam lobes and worn lifters. That repair ran him around $850, plus 3 days off the road. He believes to this day it was the dry filter install, because everything else on his maintenance was by the book, and he had no other clear explanation for accelerated wear at that mileage. Mistake number 4. Dry oil filter gasket. You've got the filter pre-filled and ready to spin on. You skip one step, putting a thin film of fresh oil around the rubber gasket on the filter itself. It's a new filter, it's clean, it looks fine. Why bother? Here's why. The gasket on the new filter is dry rubber. When you press it against the metal mating surface on the block and start spinning the filter to tighten, dry rubber resists sliding. There's a real chance the gasket rolls, folds into a thin ridge, or tears. You can't see the damage. The filter hit resistance, and you walked away thinking you were done. 10 minutes into running, oil starts dripping. Half an hour later, it's a steady, thin stream. An hour on the highway, and the whole underside is soaked, and your pan level dropped below min. Second effect. Even if the gasket doesn't tear, dry rubber can bond hard to the block over 20 to 30,000 miles of use. When you come back for the next change, the filter won't come off, not even with a strap wrench. Now you're doing shade tree damage, punching the can with a screwdriver, chasing the oil, picking the old gasket off the block in pieces, scratching the mating surface. And the next filter seal is compromised. A thin film of oil, 30 seconds of your index finger going around the ring. The gasket softens, slides during install, seats without tearing, and a year later comes off with one turn of a wrench. Mistake number 3. Skipping the second level check. You poured in the volume the manual asks for, say 4.5 quarts. Dipstick check right after, between min and max, closer to max. Job done. You pack up, close the hood, drive off. Look at what just happened though. You poured that oil into a cold engine. An empty new filter takes about 200 to 300 milliliters of fill volume. Oil galleries in the head and cam bearing feeds take another 150 to 200. If the car has an oil cooler, another 100. That's up to half a quart of fill volume the pump hasn't gotten to yet, because you haven't run the engine. A dipstick check on a not yet run engine after a fresh fill is a max volume reading, not a real running level reading. It says max. Then you start the engine, the pump fills the filter and the galleries and the cooler, and the actual sump level drops 2 to 3 graduations on the stick. You end up down at mid-range or below, and you drive off thinking you overfilled. The right sequence. Pour in what the manual calls for. Check the stick, in range. Start the engine. Let it idle a minute or two until oil pressure stabilizes and the light stays out solid. Shut it down. Wait 3 to 5 minutes. This matters because you need the oil to drain back from the top end into the pan. Check the stick again. Now you have a real running level. If it's low, add 8 to 10 ounces. Repeat the idle and drain back cycle. Check one more time. Mistake number 2. Overfilling past the max line. You think more is better. Simple logic. Oil is protection, so more oil, more protection. It won't disappear. It'll last longer, less strain on the system, right? Wrong. Backwards, actually. Overfilling past max is one of the most expensive mistakes on this list, and one of the least talked about. Physically, what happens? Oil level rises high enough that the counterweights on the crankshaft start touching the surface of the oil in the pan. You know what crank RPM looks like at highway speed on a normal engine, around 2,000 to 3,000. This isn't touching, it's whipping. The crank turns the oil into foam, like a kitchen mixer turns cream into whipped cream. Foam is tiny air bubbles suspended through the whole volume. That foam gets pumped into the lubrication system. The problem with foam, it doesn't have enough load-carrying capacity to form a proper hydrodynamic film. A normal oil layer at a crank bearing is about 2 to 3 microns thick and keeps the bearing shell from touching the journal. That's what stops metal on metal. Foam doesn't build that layer. Bearings start touching journals under load, and scoring begins within the first few hundred miles. Second effect, seals. Oil level in the engine is tied to pressure in the crankcase ventilation system. Overfill, and you push extra pressure through the PCV, which starts blowing out crank seals, rear main, front main. Now you've got a leak. From there, 3 scenarios. Oil ends up on the accessory belt. Belt slips off, you're driving with no alternator and no power steering. Or oil drips onto the exhaust manifold. Rare, but real fire hazard. Or, most commonly, oil leaves the engine at a quart a week. You run it lean on the pan and bearings score. Repair math. Rear main seal by itself, a few $100s in parts. But the labor is the killer because you're pulling the transmission on most cars. Total repair generally runs $900 to $1,600 depending on the vehicle. Rod bearing replacement, $1,800 to $2,800 on an inline 4. Full rebuild after scored journals, $4,000 and up. Rule number 2, simple. Level between min and max. Closer to max is fine, above max is not. If you overfilled, use a hand pump through the dipstick tube to draw out the excess. A basic one costs about $15, takes 5 minutes to use. Cheaper than a rear main by any measure. Mistake number 1. The old gasket stuck to the block. This is the most dangerous mistake on the list, and simultaneously the most common. Mechanics call it double gasket, and it's the #1 cause of a fully working car showing up on a tow truck the day after an oil change. How it happens. You unscrewed the old filter. It came off easy. You set it aside. You looked at the mounting point on the block, saw a clean, flat metal face, grabbed the new filter, spun it on, tightened it down. Everything looks right, but the whole time the old rubber gasket from the previous filter was still stuck on the block. Sometimes it's stuck so tight it doesn't leave with the can. You didn't see it. Maybe the light was bad. Maybe there was grime around it. Maybe it seated flush against the block face and blended into the metal. What you've got now: 2 gaskets in series, 1 brand new on the new filter, 1 worn one still stuck between the new filter and the block. 2 layers of rubber can't hold the sealing pressure. While the engine is cold and pressure is low, no leak. Turn the key, drive out to the road. First hill. RPM climbs to 4,000. Oil pressure jumps to normal. 55 to 65 pounds per square inch on most engines. That's when the double gasket lets go. 5 quarts of oil out the bottom of the car in 2 to 3 minutes. What's left inside is drops. Pump pulls air. Bearings score within 15 seconds of oil starvation. Cams within a minute. 2 more minutes and the crank welds itself into the mains. Total loss. Low-end rebuild cost $2,200 on a small 4, up to $4,500 on a V6 or turbo. Some of these don't get rebuilt. They get scrapped for the transmission. A guy I know in Central Ohio did his own oil change on a 2014 Toyota Camry 2.5-liter in his garage back in 2022. Careful work, OE filter, oil he'd used before. Drove to work the next morning, headed out of Newark toward Columbus on I-70. About 40 miles in, the oil pressure warning came on red, and about 90 seconds after that, the engine locked up. On the tow, he got the bad news: old gasket on the block. Repair quote was $2,900 for a used engine from a dismantler with labor, or $4,400 for a rebuild. He spent $3,000 on gas station coffee and a job he'd walk past for 30 seconds of visual check. The rule: when you take the old filter off, flashlight and check the mounting surface. Not with your eyes from a foot away, with your finger. Run it around the whole sealing surface. If you feel rubber, take it off. If you're not sure, wipe with a clean rag and check with your finger again. 30 seconds of your attention versus $3,000 for an engine. Bonus: do not start and drive right away. You finished the change, cleared all 9 mistakes above. You want to turn the key and go. That's where you can undo the whole careful job with one press of the accelerator. After the fill, the lubrication system is empty of pressure. The pump, the galleries, the lifters, the bearings, they all need to fill up with fresh oil in the first few seconds of running, and it takes a bit more time after that for pressure to stabilize. Hit the gas and drive off immediately, and you're loading the engine before pressure is at running spec. That's the window where friction in the most loaded pairs is below normal and load is already full. The right sequence, and it's basically free. Start the engine. Do not touch the gas. Let it idle for 30 to 60 seconds, calm and even. In that time, the pump fills every gallery. Oil pressure stabilizes at running spec. The lifters bleed up. First minute or two of driving. Keep it easy. Under 2,500 revolutions per minute. No hard pedals. After that, normal driving. This matters extra on turbo engines. The turbo shaft rides on a hydrodynamic oil film in its bearing, and if you spool the turbo to 5,000 revolutions per minute on boost right at startup, that film may not be fully there yet. One event like that gives the shaft a microscore that shows up as play a few thousand miles later, and eventually as noise. On a modern Turbo 4, replacement is $1,500 to $3,000 for the unit plus labor. 30 seconds of your patience after the fill is the cheapest insurance on your engine I know of. It costs no money. It costs a little attention and a habit. One more thing worth mentioning here. On a lot of modern cars, anything with variable valve timing and a chain-driven cam setup, the first 30 seconds of oil pressure ramp up is also when the timing solenoids get their first hit of fresh oil. If those solenoids see a load event before they've bled up, they can hunt and stumble for a minute or two. And on some vehicles, that throws a temporary code that clears itself but stays logged. If you've ever pulled codes and seen a mystery VVT event with no clear cause, that startup and go habit is a strong candidate. That's the 9 plus 1 bonus. And here's the thread. Not one of these 9 has anything to do with what's in the jug you poured in. All 9 are about how you did it. Premium oil won't save you if the old gasket is stuck on the block. An OE filter won't save you if you put it on dry. Even the exactly right approval won't save you if you overfilled, because foam in a bearing works the same on cheap 5W30 as it does on top-shelf 0W20. An oil change is a diagnostic. You get to see what came out and what's on the magnetic plug. It's a check. The mounting surface, the crush washer, the filter gasket, the level after startup. And only at the very end is it the pour, the easiest part of the whole thing. Comment below and tell me, which of these 9 did you find on your own car? Which did you learn the hard way before you knew better? And if you're a mechanic, which of these 9 shows up most often on a tow truck? I've got a suspicion, but I'd rather hear it from someone who lifts hoods for a living. If this was useful, like, subscribe, notifications on. I put out a few of these a week. Tools, fuel, diagnostics, and honest DIY without the heroics. Thanks for staying to the end. Take care of the engine. You only get the one.